Do you want to become a talk show host? Do you have a great idea? Passionate World Talk Radio is currently looking for podcast hosts for our Internet Talk radio station. Please email us at pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com with your name, email address, cell phone number, and podcast topic. In return, you will receive a 3-minute intro on air to a live audience about your podcast. Remember, just email us your name, email address, and your podcast topic, and in return, you will receive a free 3-minute intro on the air. How cool is that? Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
Well, hello and welcome to the Wine and Cheese program. My name is Sheila Wilson. I am a registered nurse and president of Stop Healthcare Violence. I'm a host on Passionate World Talk Radio. And before I introduce my guest who has been on the show before, I just want to say a disclaimer. The opinions of the guest may not represent the views of the host or the station. So today on Wine and Cheese is Beckett again. Her last name is Augat, and I am sure you remember her. She is a nurse at St Vincent's in Worcester, and they have been on the news for a long time now. She has been on strike. How long, Beckett?
147 days today.
147 days.
Over 5 months. We started March 8th.
Unbelievable. And you are striking for safe staffing? Is that true?
That is. We want safer patient ratios and safer patient staffing. The numbers that they've been giving us with no acuity taken into account are untenable. It's not able to be done and keep patients safe. So there was increase in falls, increase in wounds, and patients weren't getting medications in an effective manner. It's just not doable. You have nurses leaving the shift feeling like they didn't do a good job and crying on the way home. And we had a huge turnover rate. We lost over 20 nurses in a year in the emergency room. When I first started there, they said, on a really bad night, you might have 5. Well, then we had a new director come in and state, there's no reason you can't take 6 if you can take 5. No, there's absolutely no acuity. 6 patients, and there's no acuity taken into that in the emergency room. If your room's open, you take the patient. So you could get the stroke that's coming next, or the cardiac arrest, or if that's what was open, that's a lot of the times, if we can't open up a trauma room, you take what's coming in. And it got to the point where, well, if you have 6 patients, you can take a 7th. And there was no restriction on it, no restriction on acuity, no backup. It was just, you deal with it. And the nurses at St. Vincent have taken a stand. Over 700 nurses out of 800, low 800 nurses went on strike March 8th, walked out at 6 o'clock in the morning and said, we are choosing to advocate for our patients over our financial and physical well-being. And we have been on strike since then.
Wow. I was just talking to somebody that I used to work in an ER, and she works in an ER. And we were talking about how you get one patient, and it's not noted that she's has to go to the trauma room, or he or a she, and they all of a sudden go into VFib. And if you have 5 other patients, and VFib is really a deadly rhythm to have, how do you do that? So you leave all your other patients by themselves because you're taking care of this person? I mean,
and
what is
that a nurse? There is no backup there. That's the problem. There's not always a pivot nurse or somebody who can step in to help. Resource should be able to step in to help, but that's not always the case if somebody else is drowning or if the buses are coming in or they're dealing with their issues. And so, yeah, your other patients, you hope that some of the nurses to the right and the left of your assignment will help. But again, they've got their own 5 or 6 or 7 patients. And they're going to make sure that their license is covered and make sure their group's taken care of before they take care of your group unless something's going wrong with another patient. And hopefully they catch it as you're running around in that room trying to get it done.
Now, in St. Vincent, do you have a good amount of docs? Where I worked, there was one doc from 7A to 11A, then 2 docs from 11A to 11P, and then it went back to 1 doc from
the funny thing is that they've stepped up the amount of docs and PAs in the ER. Prior to COVID, because they saw the increase in patient numbers and acuity, they changed how they staff. They increased staffing numbers. So we actually used to, from 11P to 7A, only have 1 doc. And then there would be 2 docs in the morning that kind of, filtered in. And then they had their PAs. So that overnight doc usually had a PA with them.
And when you say
now they still,
you're talking about a
physician assistant.
Yeah. Okay.
So they would have just the 2. Now they have a doc who actually stays till 3 o'clock, I believe it was, and then a second PA that stays till then. So they've changed how they've rotated through. So there's really only 1 doc by themselves at 3 a.m. because they saw the numbers and the acuity increase. Well, they never adjusted the nursing numbers. So we're still seeing the numbers of the same number of patients as those doctors who saw that the increase called for them to have more staffing, and nursing wasn't addressed. They just expected you to do more with less and to take care of more patients with less nurses.
It's I think we spoke about this before. These people that are in control, these administrators and the big guns there, they really,
the for-profit company that owns the tenant?
Yes. Have they ever taken a nursing course or I understand they're a whole different group and they look at budgets and I just don't think that they know what you girls are doing, or guys, because there's male nurses and male assistants and everything else. Do they, or can you explain that maybe they don't know anything about nursing?
Our CEO has her degree in mechanical engineer and her master's in business. So, no, she's not a nurse. As a matter of fact, she would make her rounds to ask the employees what they need. And we would tell her the same thing. And it got to the point where it was so frustrating because, you would say it to her, or you could be spending time with a patient and here she is with a notebook asking for your attention. And nothing ever came of any of it. Not a thing. And so it got to the point where I think one of our nurses actually handed her an enema bottle and asked her if she could administer that for her. And she kind of looked at it and goes, "What is that?" And she's like, "It's an enema." So she didn't even know what she was holding. And she put it down and walked away. So it gave everybody at least a little relief, a chuckle. But she has no background in nursing whatsoever, or medicine for that fact.
And so sometimes I really believe, I was out on strike, and I think I've told you that before. I certainly wasn't out on strike as long as you've been out on strike. But one of our M&A reps, her first name is Julie, is absolutely fantastic. And she got us that they accepted. I think you might know Julie. We got back to work, not in a short time, but heck of a lot shorter than what you guys are doing. but our hospital seemed to understand a little bit better. And I can't believe that a hospital as well known as St. Vincent's is having such a hard time understanding safe staffing.
No, we actually just had the new CNO, because we do have a new CNO right now, and he had stated we don't staff to the what-ifs. They won't even discuss the emergency department. And the sad thing is that in a hospital, you do kind of staff to the what-ifs, like how many surgeries do you have coming out? You need to have a plan for that. And here's the other thing that makes St. Vincent unique from a lot of other hospitals is that we have not only per diem, a lot of hospitals have per diem, but we have what are called flex positions. So if you're a 24 flex, you can be flexed up or down a shift. And so if you're running over staff and it's a slower day, which doesn't typically happen, you always have the ability to flex somebody home.
Well, could they be flexed to a different floor that might be busy?
You would think, and that's what they did a bit during COVID, but it really had to be pushed by the nurses. Even during COVID, they would say, oh, no, the other units don't need you. The ICU doesn't need you. One of our union reps, Bill, actually used to be an ICU nurse, and he works on the GI lab. And he asked a couple times, and he was told, no, they didn't need help. So the next time, he's like, well, I'm not listening. He went down there, and sure enough, the ICU was so happy to see him and to have an extra set of hands on board that we ended up, amongst ourselves saying, well, we're not going to take the no's. We're going to actually start calling the other departments and making sure that they don't need help before we get flexed. I'm sorry, what was that?
Well, I was thinking during COVID,
yeah.
all of what was going on, and you have the same nurses that work full time, you have the same nurses that work part time, so you get somebody in there full time, they're totally exhausted.
Well, and not only that, but they furloughed staff. St. Vincent furloughed staff. They furloughed nurses. They had the government paying them unemployment while they took in the CARES Act money.
Wow.
They turned a profit during COVID.
Amazing.
They furloughed security officers. Why would we not need our SPOs? We were outside in a tent. Of course we needed extra security out there. But they furloughed staff, and they saved money, and they paid off debts instead of putting the money towards, what they were supposed to, which, the PPE. We had a hard time getting N95s. We were given Tupperware containers, which was not even what was recommended by the CDC to store your mask, so that we could use our mask for 3 12-hour shifts. And you couldn't get another mask for 3 12-hour shifts. We had plastic gowns that we were using, the disposable, one-time use, that almost as soon as you put them on, usually you have a hole in them. And we were wiping them down to reuse in COVID rooms and hanging them with our names written on them. Hanging them on hooks on the wall that they put in for it.
Because they couldn't
because they
find
wouldn't give us it. They literally locked up all of the supplies. So they would tell us that there was sufficient, and it would all be locked up for conservation. And then you wouldn't be able to get people to get it for you. We had a hard time in the very beginning getting just N95 masks brought to us when we were short, and we didn't have enough. They just squirreled everything away, and it wasn't being spent on us. It wasn't being spent on the staff and protecting them. I'll tell you that for sure. And there's even sadder portions is that we actually had one of our nurses in the OR. She had a 3D printer, and she started printing different face masks and creating different face masks that could be reusable with the filter, kind of like the Envo mask.
Yeah.
And infectious disease said no because of the material. whereas we're using the same mask for 3 days, like not any suggestions as to what they could do. They never even offered her any money towards all the supplies that she did to create these masks for them while she sat up in their sixth floor area trying to create these masks for them, because we knew that there was a possibility of a shortage, and she was trying to figure out how to protect the staff. So she bought all the supplies, everything with her own money, and created these great masks that actually worked, and was told no without an explanation. So, it's just, it's mind-blowing how far away administration is from the bedside. And, they're walking around during COVID wearing scrubs from the hospital because they didn't want to wear their own clothes in, and we couldn't even get that at first. You couldn't get, get hospital scrubs to wear while you're at work. But, the people who aren't doing any bedside work were wearing them walking around the hospital. Head of security was wearing scrubs. Why does he need to wear scrubs? But he was.
I couldn't answer that. I know that a lot of the nurses would go home, take their scrubs off, put wash up, and then wash their scrubs for the next day. I mean, I just don't understand half of this stuff. And has anybody talked about the chemicals that were used in the masks? Did you have that?
We refused. We refused to do the recycled mask. There wasn't enough proof, the risk of whatever chemicals in them. I mean, at this point, it'll be interesting to even see what wearing the mask for 12-hour shifts, like a full N95. I know that, within a couple hours, I was yawning. And, like, not little yawns, like I was tired because I'd slept well, but I think it was, like, the carbon, the recycling and not having full oxygen. You're rebreathing your own air half the time in that mask. It has a tight seal on it. It's supposed to be airtight. So, I would start getting these big yawn fests, and I would have to go outside and take off my mask for a little bit. And, some of us were getting major headaches and migraines at first. And so it'll be interesting to see what that has done and caused even.
Has anybody mentioned being examined for any lung disease? Is that
not that I know of, but I haven't been in there, so I don't know if anybody has recently.
I think that's, it keeps coming back to me, 9/11, and it took a long time before those firefighters got the assistance that I'm aware of. And just think maybe the nurses should start doing something, even with their own primary care physician, and not let it go by the wayside, like many things go by the wayside. Now, how are negotiations going? Do you think you'll be off?
I would love to, but I don't trust the hospital side at all, unfortunately. And that's what's leading these negotiations to be hard, is that, when you are in negotiations, first of all, there has to be good faith effort, which they have not put in. They waited months once we went on strike to even start negotiating again. They then waited to see if we would get our unemployment before they would come back to the table. They heard that we were going to be able to get unemployment, and they came back to the table and they gave an awful, it was an insulting offer. And it was take it or leave it. And when we brought it to the bargaining unit, they were insulted, justifiably insulted, and said, no, we're not doing that. Then they waited and dragged their feet on COBRA for us, because we had some great legislators who, because of COVID, did free COBRA, and you could apply for it. And then the strike, they had passed a law that it would allow striking employees to apply for that. We were eligible for that April 1st, and they dragged their feet because the law went into effect till the end of May, and waited to the very last moment to do it. And while they were doing that, they would not negotiate. So they've gone months and even, weeks and even months without negotiating with us, without being willing to come back to the table unless we just gave them what they wanted. So there's been a lot of very poor effort on their part to truly negotiate with us. And at this point, we're, what we did have for a contract, they were violating daily, giving us more patient, putting the code red sign on so they could force the nurses on the floor to take more patients. So we want to make sure that the language is very clear in this contract, because unfortunately, in the past and even in the present of how they're negotiating with us, they haven't followed the rules. They haven't followed, good faith measure. They haven't put in the effort, and it's led to a severe lack of trust on our part. And we're not talking about trust like that we'll get the paycheck. We're talking about trust for we're able to provide the care that our patients need. We want to make sure that we do a good job. We want to feel like we're doing a good job. We want to treat our patients like we would like our families, somebody to treat our family members.
Right, like you're supposed to. When a patient comes in, you want a couple of minutes to at least address this patient. And we've talked about this before, it takes more than hello, how are you, to know the patient.
Mm-hmm.
It may take 5 or 6 times checking in on the patient to really get to know them. And that's not knowing their whole history and everything else. It's just when nurses look at these patients, they look at them differently than I think a physician. And when you know that the patient isn't telling you the whole story, we have ways of at least addressing this. And it takes time.
If we have the time to see the person, not the patient.
Right. That's a very good
difference. I think that's the difference between nurses and doctors. We see the person, or we try to see the person, and not just the patient. We're not looking for just the signs and symptoms. There's other things that we're assessing.
That's right. I can't imagine what's going on in Worcester. Now, I have heard, and I spoke to you earlier about this, that apparently Worcester, St. Vincent's is hiring lots and lots and lots of nurses. Do you find that that's true?
So I don't know if that's so much true. We have heard that they've hired some. They're also hiring new grads. So it's a very dangerous combination in there right now. We're at the end of July, and as you and I, you I'm sure know, but most nurses know that July is when we get our new residents. And these residents have gone through their last year of medical school in COVID. So I don't think, I'm not, I would be more concerned being in there as a nurse that they didn't get the full education that they deserve because of the restrictions that were in place. And, and so if I was still in there, or if I was in there at the moment, I would be very cautious with this group coming in. And every year you're cautious in July. They're new babies. They're new to the field. They're in this big hospital that's overwhelming as is, and you as a nurse help them. You help to train them. You help to let them see, the patient. You direct them in the way that they need to be directed. Sometimes it's grumbling, but sometimes it's a little bit more work. It absolutely always is a little bit more work in July. It's always a running joke. But these are, and I love working in a teaching hospital because of that, because we get the new nurses, the graduate nurses, the residents. I like doing that. I'm actually a little upset that I'm not in there for July. But for a lot, it's a lot more work, and it can be a big headache. So now you have new grad nurses and new residents. That is a double-edged sword. That is so dangerous right now. I can't even imagine. And travelers. So this isn't their community. These aren't their people. And, they come here literally because of the money that is thrown at them. And, St. Vincent's actually just put out a notice that they're going to be cutting back services because of the irresponsibility of us, the nurses on strike. So they've continued their behaviors because they want to be out all summer. Well, you went months without negotiating with us in March, April. If you don't negotiate, this is going to be prolonged. So whose fault is it really? But you're going to blame the nurses. That's how you're going to spin it. That's how their PR people have been spinning it from day one. They've taken no responsibility for their actions, their act of not paying attention and not following our contract to begin with and what our ratios were, their responsibility of even just putting the patient over profit and saying, you know what, this is a little dangerous right now. 6 patients, 7 patients is too many patients for an emergency room nurse. 5 patients with high acuity and new drips and new oxygen. They were doing high flow oxygen on the floor, which they'd never done before. These are sicker patients. Maybe we need to scale back. That's what a responsible administration would do. Somebody who is concerned about the care that their patients and their, for administration at least, their clients, their paying, individuals, that they would want to make sure that they would have better service and be taken care of so that they would have a good name. Well, they didn't care about that. They just put the pressure on the nurses. And of course, nurses do what they do always. They step up and they work harder. But they didn't feel like they were doing a good job. They weren't doing a thorough job. They couldn't do everything. It just wasn't possible. And even prior to COVID, we had 200 nurses show up to tell Tenet how untenable it was, because it was just getting worse and worse. People were getting frustrated, and we were losing staff. We had 100-something nurses walk out in the year before. So they spoke with their feet instead of, waiting for negotiations. And we started negotiations in November of 2019. This has been going on for almost 2 years, negotiations. We've been without... And they still put it on the nurses. It's still the nurses' fault. All of this is going on because it's the nurses' fault. Those, that, and the biggest thing is that they put the blame on the M&A, and they don't understand that it's not the M&A. The M&A is not like saying, hey, go do this because of this. It's not. We were already saying that the situation was so poor in there that we needed help. They ignored our help. They ignored our unsafe staffing forms. They ignored 200 nurses standing in front of them, asking them to help them. And they caused their nurses, who are members of the M&A, I am the M&A. The M&A isn't some puppeteer behind us, and we're just the little marionettes doing a dance for them. We're the nurses that are involved in the M&A. The M&A is, the board is staff nurses. The president and the vice president are both staff nurses. Nurses are in there. It's our voice. It's our voice. It's not the M&A's voice. They follow our lead.
Right.
And the nurses at St. V said, we've had enough.
That enough is enough. And
they are talking about, and they have been talking about, replacement nurses for us. But, again, we're getting ready to go into a third surge with the D variant of COVID. We're getting ready, it is the summer season. And on top of that, these agency nurses are getting pulled because we're going into third surges everywhere else, and they're getting more money and bonuses to go into COVID areas. And we've had a lot of these nurses approach us on the street and say, this is the worst assignment we've ever been in. This is the worst place. They've had surgical techs leave and say, charge us. they won't stay because the situation is even more atrocious for them. They were telling them in advertisements it's going to be 5 to 6 patients with a high rate pace, a high paced rate or something like that. That it was just, and then they get in there and they're like, we understand why you're on the street. As we've heard over and over again from agency nurses. We've heard over and over again how awful it was. They have a striking Facebook site where they talk about the different locations, and one of the nurses wrote how she had gone into the bathroom and cried. So, I mean, they're not having any user. They're, what they do is atrocious. If they weren't in there in that building, it would have forced tenant a long time ago to come back to the table. And the other realization that some of them have started to realize is that we started this fight because of our patients and because of our community. However, it's now reached a national level.
Right.
And it's not going to affect just us. It's going to affect patients and nurses across the nation.
Right.
So
right.
It's not something that we can back down from.
No.
There's no way that we're on strike for 147 days and go back into a situation that's worse than we left it.
Right. Right. And I don't think the public realizes that all we have to do is make one mistake. And that would be in the midst of 5, 6, 7 patients, and one is going right down the tubes, and you can't get in there, you lose your license. And for all of the work and everything else, that is absolutely ridiculous. And it should.
The thing to that, Sheila, is that they did try to offer us money at the beginning, and I've said this over and over again, that there is no amount of money that would appease my conscience if something happened to my patient.
Right.
My license. We work very hard to get our license. We work very hard to maintain our license. Could I get another job in a different field? Yeah. Could I get that person back for their family? No.
Yeah. No,
so it wouldn't even be the license or, yes, it would definitely affect how my life is and what I do, but the gist of it is that I'm hurting somebody, and that's not why I went into this field. I would be hurting somebody, and I would be hurting their family. And
right.
I didn't go into this field to hurt people. I went into this field to help them feel better, help their families get them through it, because I like helping people. I like helping them and being able to be that person that they look to for guidance and assistance and help. So for me, I would never get over the fact of hurting somebody. That would never go away for me. And I think I would be speaking for most nurses saying that if something happened to their patients that they could have prevented by having one less patient, we had to fight for this. And we have to continue to fight. And not only that, but the next note of that is that, you as well as I both know that there's been studies that with the increased number of patients that a nurse has comes the increased risk of violence against that healthcare provider.
Right. Right.
So they've actually there was a hospital here in Massachusetts that recently went through negotiations, and they took the money over staffing. And from what I just heard is that they had a nurse that got severely assaulted last night, or the other night, this past week, and severely assaulted. She's in bad condition. On top of that, 2 weeks ago now, I spoke at the State House through Zoom for legislature that we're trying to get passed on violence against healthcare providers and holding the institutions responsible. And that morning, one of the other nurses who was testifying with me, she's a Boston nurse, had gotten a text message that one of their nurses had been assaulted.
Wow.
And, you know, a lot of this can be averted by having the staffing that's appropriate. I guess right now in St. Vincent's, because they haven't had enough beds and they've been boarding, they actually were having 3 police details, is what we were told by one of the officers down there, because they were getting assaulted and screamed at. And so the patients were out of control and angry that they were stuck in the emergency room instead of being able to be put through to the floors where they could have a room. And it got to the point where they thought it was dangerous enough that they had to have police officers in the department.
Yeah, no, that's too many times. The assaults are higher and they're more violent.
Yeah.
And it's getting to the point where you almost wonder, if you go into an emergency room that used to be safe, you have your security guards that are hands off. You have security guards that cannot tase anybody unless they can see a weapon, which is a gun or a knife. But the person that's assaulting is assaulting the nurse right in front of them, and they can't do a damn thing about it. And so what is the purpose of that?
Well, here's the sad thing, is that at the emergency room in St. Vincent's, we actually have an acute care behavioral health unit that has 8 beds. At night, a lot of the times, they wouldn't staff the rest of the ER. We would still have a lot of patients that needed care. So nurses would take 8 patients in that behavioral health unit. Well, they stopped staffing it with an SPO, a special police officer, and they wanted them walking outside. So they've been putting in our agency, or our, why can't I think of the term? So it's not agency, but it's like a consult. They hired, it's G4S, which is a security company. They hired them as security officers, and they started stationing them in the behavioral health unit. Well, they have the contract of hands off, so they don't have pepper spray, they don't have a baton, they don't have handcuffs, and they're not supposed to do anything. Now you have 1 nurse, 8 patients, acute psychiatric. All it takes is one of them to act up. We have 3 patient observers, but a lot of the time they are just patient observers. So they don't get CPI or MOAB training, and they're hands off.
Yeah.
So if we get assaulted, it's that 1 nurse until the locked unit can have the doors open for other staff, other nurses to come in to help.
And that doesn't even make sense. Now, I have, time is running out, and I just want to ask you one more question. Was it true that there were a group of nurses went to Tenet in Texas?
I was one of them. We did.
You were?
We did that. We went down there. We had a petition with over 600 signatures of the nurses that are in strike, asking them to come back to the table and to negotiate in good faith. And because they weren't negotiating, and then the hospital came back, and there was plans that the Dallas newspaper had already written about us coming down. They knew we were coming, and St. Vincent's all of a sudden wanted to negotiate on the day that we were leaving to go, and the next day that we were down there. And when we said no, then they went to the newspaper and said, see, they're not taking this seriously. They just want to go do this drama and the theatrics.
Wow.
So again, it's that whole spin that they like to put. It's not that you haven't been to the table for, a month. Oh, no, now you want to do it that day.
Right.
And when we say more than 3/4 of the negotiation committee is going to be down there, there's not going to be anybody here to meet you. Now we're just dramatic and theatrical. So, we did go down there. We presented the petition to one of the vice presidents. The CEO was not there that day, so he did not receive it, Eric Rittenmeyer. But, Tenet was actually, they had cold waters outside and tents set up for us. They wouldn't allow all of us to go into the building. They only allowed 3. They had increased security. When we came back, we did go into negotiations. We agreed to meet in person, and actually that was a disaster, Sheila. So we came back, meet in person. We've got, the new CNO, the new Chief Human Resource Officer. We're meeting all those people. Well, they had a security escorted up to a room. We were allowed to use the one bathroom across the hall. For 3 hours, we kept telling them that we were out of toilet paper and paper towels in that bathroom, and we couldn't get anything. They had provided coffee at 10 o'clock in that morning. When we asked if we could get it refilled or if we could just go down to Dunkin's with the security escort, we were told no, we were not allowed to leave that room. So we were pretty much held prisoners in this room with security on both sides. They brought up sandwiches at, noontime, and those sat out all day, and they had us in that room till 8 o'clock at night. And there was no other food, no other drinks brought up, no other coffee or tea, nothing. And, 3 hours, we were taking the paper towels and the napkins from the sandwiches, what was provided with the sandwiches so that we could use the facilities. So it got to the point where it was absolutely unacceptable and unbelievable. Thank you. And they treated us, it was insulting how they treated us. These, we're in negotiations, we're on strike, but we're still the nurses at that hospital.
Right.
We've worked there. We have nurses on a negotiation committee who've worked there for over 40 years.
I met some of them.
I'm probably one of the youngest at 13.
Right. When we were in Worcester, talking to you girls, I must have talked to 5, 6 people, and all at once, and they all told me 30, 40 years.
Yeah. And that's what,
wow.
And people ask us all the time, well, why don't you just go to another hospital? Because there's 2 other hospitals in Worcester that are down the street, have better pay, better benefits, better everything, pension, all the stuff that we're looking for to be competitive in the market right now. And it's because of nurses like that, where else do you go that you have nurses surrounding you that have been in the same hospital with the same group for 30, 40 years?
Yep.
That's not that. You don't get that every day nowadays. People are so transient that they move from one place to the other that you don't get that history. You don't get that knowledge base, and it's your family. And that's the biggest thing, is that this is a family. It can be a dysfunctional family, but it's still your work family.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people don't want to lose that.
They're there for the patient. That's all they want to do. Take care of the patient. That's exactly it. And we know, but who's to your right and who's to your left, and it's your people. Yep. It's hard to leave your people. This is your community. This is our community hospital. That's where, until the strike occurred, this is where my parents who live in Townsend, I would have them come up here to the hospital. Most of their specialists are at that hospital. It's who I trusted. It's who I knew to take care of my family. And, I've had to tell them that during the strike, they can't go into that building. They can go to their appointments, but they can't go into the emergency room that they would usually go into. Right.
And it's heartbreaking.
That's the sad part. It is. It is, because even though I'm not a member of St. Vincent's was always top on the list. And, you hear really good things about it. And then we went there and I've worked here for 35 years. Oh, yeah. Oh, I worked here for 42 years. Yeah, I hate to be out on strike. I've been here 37 years. You go, whole mackerel. And that's, well,
I didn't think I would ever stay in one place. I honestly, I was one of those agency CNAs who bounced around hospital. I was okay with that. I've got that ER nurse personality that you can just handle and you deal and you move on.
Yep.
But, and I had been offered jobs at UMass, but I like my hospital. I like my people. And that's one thing Tenant didn't really count on either right now, is that they keep ignoring the emergency department and CWI in the negotiations. But the other nurses, it's not even that department of nurses, it's other nurses who are like, there's no way we're going back if you guys aren't taken care of too. They've created such a strong community in the nurses there. They messed up royally. I have triple to quadruple the amount of numbers, and I have, nurses who are making my son cheesecake who I've never met before, but now they're some of my closest, dearest friends.
Right.
And I can't imagine, it was a blessing for me, at least, because I got a lot more friends.
Well, I think St. Vincent's is showing everybody, all the nurses, you stand together, you support each other, and you're going to come through. Just don't take contract, lightly. Look at it and see what's really going on. And, your hospital, especially the ER, they're not customers. They are patients. You don't need TVs in the room. You don't need all this fancy equipment. You just need to take care of them. However, our time is running out, and I will talk to you in a few minutes after we say goodbye to everybody that will be listening.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me again, Sheila. I appreciate it.
Oh, Beckett, you are unbelievable. A wonderful, wonderful role model for all of us.
Do you want to become a talk show host? Do you have a great idea? Passionate World Talk Radio is currently looking for podcast hosts for our Internet Talk radio station. Please email us at pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com with your name, email address, cell phone number, and podcast topic. In return, you will receive a 3-minute intro on air to a live audience about your podcast. Remember, just email us your name, email address, and your podcast topic, and in return, you will receive a free 3-minute intro on the air. How cool is that? Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the Internet.